I'm Veronica Chen, and I never thought my life would become a cautionary tale about trusting the wrong people. But here I am, ready to share what happened when my daughter tried to take everything from me. Before I dive deep, let me ask you something. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. I'm 65 years old, and for the past 32 years, I've lived in the same Victorian-style home on Riverside Avenue in Portland. It's a 3-story beauty with ivy crawling up the brick walls, a wraparound porch, and a garden that's won neighborhood awards 3 years running. My late husband, Marcus, and I bought this place when our daughter Isabella was just 2 years old. Marcus passed away 7 years ago after a sudden heart attack, and since then, this house has been my everything, my comfort, my memories, my reason to wake up every morning and tend to the roses he planted for our 20th anniversary. Isabella, my only child, has always been ambitious. She graduated top of her class, became a corporate lawyer, married a man named Damien who works in private equity, and they live in a sleek downtown penthouse about an hour away. For years, our relationship was good. Not perfect, but good. Weekly phone calls, monthly brunches, birthday celebrations. I was proud of her success, even if I didn't always understand her world of mergers and acquisitions and 6-figure bonuses. But about 8 months ago, things started changing. It was subtle at first, like a shift in the wind that you barely notice until suddenly you're caught in a storm. Isabella started asking questions that felt intrusive. "Mom, have you thought about what happens to this house when you're gone? Don't you think the property taxes are too high for someone on a fixed income? Wouldn't a condo be more practical at your age?" I brushed it off initially, chalking it up to her being a lawyer, always thinking 3 steps ahead. But then the visits started. Isabella and Damien would show up without calling first, which had never been their style. They'd walk through rooms like they were appraising the place, commenting on things that needed updating. "The furnace is old, Mom. These hardwood floors could use refinishing. Have you thought about replacing the windows? They're not energy efficient." Damien was worse than Isabella. He had this way of looking at everything like it was an investment opportunity. One Sunday afternoon, he actually took measurements of the living room while I was making tea. When I asked what he was doing, he said he was just curious about the square footage. Just curious, as if my home was some property listing he was browsing online. The phone calls increased too. Isabella would call late at night, her voice tight with what she called concern, but felt more like interrogation. "Have you paid your utility bills this month? Do you have enough for groceries? Are you managing okay financially? I'm 65, not 95. I have a pension from my years working as a school administrator, Social Security, and savings that Marcus and I built together. I was managing just fine, not 95. Then came the comments about my health. "You're getting forgetful, Mom. Last week you couldn't remember what day we were supposed to meet. You seemed confused when I asked about your doctor's appointment." I wasn't forgetful or confused. She had changed our brunch date twice and never confirmed which doctor's appointment she was asking about. But she was planting seeds, creating a narrative that I was declining, that I needed help, that I couldn't be trusted to manage my own life. The breaking point came on a Wednesday afternoon in March. I was in my sunroom, repotting some orchids I'd gotten from the Botanical Gardens spring sale, when I heard a car pull into my driveway. I looked out and saw Isabella's silver Mercedes, and behind it, a white van with a company logo I didn't recognize. My stomach clenched even before Isabella stepped out of her car, wearing her lawyer face, the one she uses in courtrooms. She walked up to my front door and let herself in with the spare key I'd given her years ago for emergencies. "Mom, we need to talk." There was no warmth in her voice, no greeting, just that flat, professional tone that made me feel like a client rather than her mother. I followed her into my living room, dirt still on my gardening gloves, and waited. "What's going on, Isabella?" Why is there a van in my driveway? She sat down on the sofa, the same sofa where I'd read her bedtime stories, where we'd watched movies together, where Marcus and I had cuddled on countless Sunday mornings. She crossed her legs, pulled out her tablet, and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold determination, mixed with something that looked almost like satisfaction. Mom, Damien and I have made a decision about your living situation. We've been monitoring your finances and your behavior, and it's clear you can't continue living here alone. We've found a wonderful senior community called Willowbrook. It's assisted living, very nice, with staff available 24/7. The van outside is from Premier Moving Services. They're here to help you pack your essentials. The rest will go into storage until we can sort through everything. NPP. I stood there, unable to process what I was hearing. What are you talking about? I don't need assisted living. I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself. NPP. Isabella's expression didn't change. Mom, you're in denial. We've documented incidents of memory loss, confusion, and financial mismanagement. Your house is falling apart. You're isolated here with no support system. Damien and I have already signed the papers for Willowbrook. Your room is ready. This is happening today. My hands started shaking. The documents for what? You can't just decide where I live. This is my house. Actually, she said, pulling up something on her tablet. About the house. We need to discuss that too. Damien and I have taken out a substantial loan for a business investment. The deal fell through, and we're facing some financial pressures. We need to liquidate assets quickly. This house is in a prime location and the real estate market is strong. We've already contacted a realtor. The listing goes live next week. My legs gave out and I sank into Marcus's old recliner. You're selling my house? Without asking me? Without even discussing it? We're not selling it without your involvement, Mom. You'll sign the papers. Isabella's voice was matter-of-fact, like she was explaining a contract to a client. The proceeds will go into a trust that Damien and I will manage for your care at Willowbrook. You'll be taken care of, and we'll be able to resolve our financial situation. It's a solution that works for everyone. A solution that works for everyone. I stared at my daughter, this woman I'd given birth to, nursed through fevers, cheered for at soccer games, helped through college finals, and I didn't recognize her. When did you become this person? She stood up, irritation flashing across her face. I'm being practical, Mom. I'm being responsible. You're too emotional to see that this is for your own good. That's when Damien walked in through my front door, also using that spare key, holding a clipboard and wearing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mrs. Chen, the movers are ready. If you could just point out which items you'd like to take with you to Willowbrook, we can get started. They have size restrictions, so we're talking minimal furniture, maybe some clothes and personal items. Everything else gets stored or sold. I found my voice then, and it came out stronger than I expected. Get out of my house, both of you, right now. Isabella's mask cracked slightly. Mom, don't make this difficult. We're trying to help you. If you don't cooperate, we'll have to pursue legal guardianship. I've already spoken to a judge. With the documentation we have about your decline, it won't be hard to prove you're incapable of making your own decisions. Legal guardianship. The words hit me like a slap. My own daughter was threatening to have me declared incompetent so she could control my life and my assets, so she could steal my home to pay off her debts. I stood up slowly, pulled off my gardening gloves, and looked Isabella straight in the eye. I will never sign papers giving you my house. I will never voluntarily go to Willowbrook. And if you try to force me, I will fight you with everything I have. You don't have anything, Mom. Damien's voice was condescending, like he was talking to a child. You're a retired school administrator living on a modest pension. We're high-earning professionals with resources and connections. If you fight this, you'll lose, and you'll end up exactly where we're trying to place you anyway. Except you'll have wasted money you don't have on lawyers you can't afford. That's what he thought. That's what they both thought, that I was helpless, that I was alone, that I had no options. They had no idea what I was actually capable of when pushed into a corner. I walked to my front door and opened it wide. I'm going to say this one more time. Get out of my house. Take your movers with you. If you're not gone in 5 minutes, I'm calling the police. Isabella stood up, gathering her things with sharp, angry movements. Fine, but this isn't over, Mom. We'll be back with court orders if necessary. And when we do, you'll have no choice but to comply. They left, the moving van pulling away behind Isabella's Mercedes. I stood in my doorway, watching them disappear down Riverside Avenue. And then I closed the door, locked it, and sat down on my stairs. My whole body was shaking. Not just my hands anymore, but I wasn't crying. I was angry. Furious, actually. And underneath the fury was something else. Determination. I pulled out my phone and called my best friend, Monica Rivera. Monica and I have known each other for 40 years, since our kids were in elementary school together. She's a retired paralegal who worked in family law for 3 decades. If anyone would know what to do, it would be Monica. She answered on the second ring. Veronica, what's wrong? Your voice sounds strange. I told her everything. Every word Isabella and Damien had said, every threat they'd made, every horrifying detail of their plan to steal my life. Monica listened without interrupting, and when I finished, there was a long silence on the other end. Finally, she spoke, her voice hard as steel. Those bastards. Veronica, listen to me carefully. Do not sign anything. Do not let them back in your house. Do not answer the door if they return. I'm calling my former colleague, Elizabeth Grant. She's the best elder law attorney in the state, and she specializes in cases exactly like this. Adult children trying to exploit their parents. Can you meet with us tomorrow morning? Yes, absolutely yes. Good. In the meantime, I want you to write down everything that happened today. Every word you remember, every threat, everything. Include the timeline of how Isabella's behavior has changed over the past 8 months. We need documentation. I spent the rest of that evening writing. Pages and pages of notes, going back through emails and text messages from Isabella. Finding the subtle threats and the not-so-subtle pressure. I pulled bank statements showing I was financially stable. Medical records from my last checkup showing I was in excellent health for my age. Photographs of my well-maintained house and garden. I was building a case, and I was doing it methodically, the way Marcus always said I approached problems, with clarity and purpose. The next morning, I met Monica and Elizabeth Grant at a coffee shop downtown. Elizabeth was in her 50s, impeccably dressed, with intelligent gray eyes that missed nothing. She reviewed my documentation while we drank coffee, occasionally asking questions, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When she finished reading, she looked up at me. Mrs. Chen, what your daughter and son-in-law attempted yesterday constitutes attempted financial exploitation, possible fraud, and coercion. These are serious crimes. The threats about guardianship are also concerning. Guardianship abuse is a growing problem, and it's often used exactly as they described, as a way to control elderly parents and access their assets. Can they actually get guardianship? I asked, voicing my biggest fear. Not if we move first, Elizabeth leaned forward. Here's what we're going to do. First, we're filing for a restraining order preventing Isabella and Damien from entering your property or contacting you, except through legal counsel. Second, we're securing your assets. That means revoking any power of attorney you might have granted, updating your will to include protective provisions, and possibly placing your house in a trust that they can't touch. Third, we're reporting this to Adult Protective Services. They investigate financial exploitation of seniors. And this case is textbook. What if they follow through on their threat? What if they file for guardianship anyway? Then we fight it aggressively. Elizabeth's voice was confident. I've handled dozens of these cases. With your medical records, financial records, and testimony from friends and neighbors about your competence, no judge will grant them guardianship. But Veronica, I need you to understand something. This is going to get ugly. Isabella and Damien sound desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. Are you prepared for this fight? I thought about Marcus, about the life we'd built in this house, about the garden he'd planted, about every memory held in these walls. I thought about Isabella, the baby I'd held, the little girl who'd believed I could fix anything, and how that little girl had turned into a woman who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to her financial problems. Yes, I said firmly. I'm prepared. The restraining order was granted within 48 hours. A sheriff's deputy delivered it to Isabella at her law firm, which I knew would humiliate her in front of her colleagues. Good. Let her feel a fraction of what she'd made me feel. The order prohibited her and Damien from coming within 500 feet of my property or contacting me, except through our attorneys. Isabella's response came through her own lawyer 2 days later. A formal petition for emergency guardianship, claiming I was mentally incompetent, financially irresponsible, and a danger to myself. They'd attached affidavits from 2 people I'd never heard of, claiming to be neighbors who'd witnessed concerning behavior. Elizabeth suspected they were friends of Damien's who'd been paid to lie. We have a hearing in 3 weeks, Elizabeth told me over the phone. In the meantime, I need you to document everything about your daily life. Keep a journal. Take photos of yourself at the grocery store, at your book club, volunteering, wherever you go. We need to show the judge that you're living a full, competent, independent life. So that's what I did. I documented everything. I went to my weekly book club at the public library and had my friend Sarah take photos of me engaged in literary discussions. I volunteered at the community garden, teaching kids about sustainable growing, and the coordinator wrote me a letter of recommendation about my organizational skills and mental acuity. I had my doctor complete a comprehensive cognitive assessment, which I passed with flying colors. I invited neighbors over for tea and asked if they'd be willing to provide testimony about my competence if needed. All of them agreed immediately, and 2 of them told me they'd noticed Isabella and Damien measuring rooms and taking photos of my house on their last visit, which had struck them as odd and invasive. I was building an army of truth, while Isabella and Damien were building a fortress of lies, and I was going to win. But winning came with a cost I hadn't anticipated. The stress was affecting my sleep. I'd lie awake at night wondering how my daughter had become someone capable of this level of betrayal. I'd replay her childhood in my mind, searching for signs I'd missed, moments where I'd failed as a mother, explanations for how we'd ended up here. Had I spoiled her? Had I not taught her the right values? Had Marcus and I somehow raised a person without empathy? Monica would come over and find me crying in my garden, sitting among Marcus's roses. "Stop blaming yourself," she'd say firmly. "You were a wonderful mother. Isabella made her own choices. She chose money over integrity. She chose greed over love. That's on her, not you." Logically, I knew Monica was right. Emotionally, I was drowning in guilt and grief. This wasn't just a legal battle. This was the death of my relationship with my only child, the death of my dreams of being a grandmother someday, the death of every hope I'd had for our future together. The preliminary hearing arrived on a cold Tuesday in April. The courthouse was intimidating. All marble floors and echoing hallways and serious-faced people in suits. Elizabeth met me outside the courtroom, looking confident in a navy blue dress and carrying a briefcase full of evidence. Isabella and Damien were already there, standing with their attorney, a slick-looking man in his 40s named Gregory Walsh. Isabella wouldn't look at me. She stared straight ahead, her face pale but composed. Damien kept checking his phone, looking annoyed, like this was an inconvenience rather than an attempt to destroy his mother-in-law's life. Judge Martin Keller presided. He was an older man, probably in his late 60s, with white hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. He reviewed the petition silently, then looked up at both parties. "This is a preliminary hearing to determine whether emergency guardianship is warranted while we investigate the claims more thoroughly. Mr. Walsh, present your case. Isabella's attorney stood and launched into a carefully crafted narrative, painting me as a tragic figure in decline. He described my supposed memory lapses, financial confusion, and inability to maintain my property. He presented the fake neighbor affidavits. He even brought in a gerontologist, Dr. Bernard Kim, who testified that based on Isabella's description of my behavior, I showed signs of early dementia and should not be living alone. It was all lies, but it was presented so smoothly, so professionally, that I felt a spike of fear. What if the judge believed them? What if their expensive lawyers and fake experts were more convincing than the truth? Then it was Elizabeth's turn. She stood calmly and systematically dismantled every claim. Your Honor, Mrs. Chen is not experiencing any cognitive decline. She methodically went through my medical records, my cognitive assessment scores, my financial statements, showing careful management of my resources. She called my doctor to testify remotely, and he confirmed I was in excellent health with no signs of dementia or incompetence. She presented photographs of me engaged in complex activities, teaching at the community garden, leading book club discussions, organizing a charity fundraiser for the library. She called Sarah and 2 neighbors to testify about my competence and independence. Then Elizabeth did something brilliant. She presented evidence of Isabella and Damien's true motive, their financial desperation. She had somehow obtained records of their debts, their failed investment, their need for quick cash. She showed the judge that this wasn't about concern for my welfare. This was about access to my assets. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. Now, let me continue with what happened in that courtroom, because what came next changed everything. Judge Keller listened to all the evidence with an increasingly grim expression. When both sides had finished their presentations, he sat back in his chair and was quiet for a long moment. You could feel the tension in the room, thick and suffocating. Strong, finally he spoke. I've presided over many guardianship cases in my career, and I've learned to recognize when family members are genuinely concerned about an elderly relative's welfare, versus when they're attempting to exploit them for financial gain. This case falls clearly into the latter category. And Isabella's face went pale. Damien stopped fidgeting with his phone, and Mrs. Keller continued. Mrs. Veronica Chen has presented overwhelming evidence of her competence, Judge Keller continued. Medical evaluations, cognitive assessments, financial records, testimony from friends and neighbors. She's clearly capable of managing her own affairs. In contrast, the petitioners have presented questionable affidavits from supposed neighbors who, according to court investigation, don't actually live near Mrs. Chen, and testimony from a doctor who never personally examined her. Gregory Walsh started to object, but the judge held up his hand. More concerning is the evidence of financial motive. Mr. and Mrs. Flores, he used Isabella's married name, are facing significant debt and attempted to coerce Mrs. Chen into surrendering her property. The petition for guardianship appears to be a continuation of that coercive pattern. I'm denying the emergency guardianship petition. I felt Monica grab my hand beside me as relief flooded through my body. But Judge Keller wasn't finished. Furthermore, I'm ordering an investigation by Adult Protective Services into possible financial exploitation and abuse. I'm also ordering the petitioners to pay Mrs. Chen's legal fees for this proceeding. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the courtroom. I had won. Not just won, I had been vindicated completely. The judge had seen through their lies and recognized them for what they were, predators trying to exploit their own mother. Isabella finally looked at me then, and what I saw in her eyes wasn't remorse or shame. It was fury. Pure, undiluted rage that I had dared to fight back, that I had dared to win. She stood abruptly and walked out of the courtroom without a word. Damien rushing after her, already on his phone, probably calling someone to rant about how unfair the system was. Elizabeth turned to me with a satisfied smile. "You did it, Veronica. You stood your ground and you won." I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt hollow. I'd won the legal battle, but I'd lost my daughter, and no victory in court could make up for that loss. Over the next few weeks, the Adult Protective Services investigation moved forward. A caseworker named Daniel Torres came to my house, reviewed all the documentation, interviewed my neighbors and friends, and concluded that Isabella and Damien had indeed attempted financial exploitation. His report recommended prosecution. The district attorney's office contacted me. They wanted to press charges for attempted fraud and elder abuse. Both were serious crimes that could result in prison time and professional consequences. For Damien, it could mean the end of his career in private equity. For Isabella, it could mean disbarment, losing her law license permanently. I sat in the DA's office, listening to them explain the case they could build, the evidence they had, the likelihood of conviction, and I couldn't decide what to do. Part of me wanted them to face full consequences for what they'd tried to do. Another part of me, the part that remembered Isabella as a little girl, couldn't bear the thought of sending my own daughter to prison. I asked for time to think about it. The DA gave me 2 weeks to make a decision about whether I wanted to pursue criminal charges or accept a civil settlement instead. Those 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I barely slept. I stopped going to book club. I let my garden grow wild. I was paralyzed by this impossible choice: justice or mercy, consequence or compassion. Monica visited me every day, bringing food I didn't eat and sitting with me in my overgrown garden. "You don't have to decide alone," she kept saying. "Whatever you choose, we'll support you." Then something unexpected happened. I received a letter in the mail, handwritten, addressed in Isabella's distinctive script. I stared at it for 10 minutes before I found the courage to open it. "Mom," it began, "I know I have no right to ask you for anything after what I've done. I know you probably hate me, and you have every reason to. But I need you to know the truth, even if it doesn't change anything. I messed up. Damien and I made terrible investments, believed the wrong people, lived way beyond our means. When everything started falling apart, I panicked. I looked at your house, this property worth so much money, and I convinced myself that it would be fair for you to help us. After all, that house would be mine someday anyway, so why not now when we needed it?" I know how twisted that sounds. I know how selfish and cruel it was. I turned you into a problem to be solved instead of my mother. I stopped seeing you as a person and started seeing you as an obstacle to my financial stability. Watching you in that courtroom, seeing the evidence of your competency, was Damien's idea. But I went along with it. I actually convinced myself we were helping you in assisted living, that we were doing this for your own good. I believed my own lies. Watching you in that courtroom, seeing the evidence of your competence and independence, hearing how my actions had hurt you, it shattered something in me. I've spent every day since then trying to understand how I became this person who would try to steal from her own mother. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect you to drop the charges or accept any settlement. I just needed you to know that I'm sorry. Not sorry I got caught, but genuinely sorry for what I tried to do to you. You deserved so much better from me. I filed for divorce from Damien. Being with him brought out the worst in me, and I can't be that person anymore. I'm entering therapy. I'm working a job I hate to pay off debts. I'm facing the consequences of my choices, and I should. If I could go back and undo it all, I would, but I can't. So all I can do is tell you that I love you, even though I showed you the exact opposite of love, and I'm sorry. So incredibly sorry. Your daughter, Isabella. I read that letter 3 times, crying through all 3 readings. It didn't excuse what she'd done. It didn't undo the trauma or the betrayal, but it was the first genuine thing I'd heard from her in over a year, and it cracked something open in my chest. I called Elizabeth that afternoon. I want to pursue a civil settlement, not criminal charges. I explained what I wanted. A legally binding agreement that Isabella and Damien would never make any claim on my property, my assets, or my decisions again. That they would pay my legal fees in full. That they would complete financial counseling and therapy. That they would stay away unless I initiated contact. Elizabeth drew up the agreement. Isabella signed it immediately. Damien resisted, but when faced with the alternative of criminal prosecution, he signed too. The civil settlement was finalized within a month. I didn't see Isabella again for 6 months after that. I heard through mutual friends that she'd followed through on the divorce, that she was working as a contract attorney for a small firm, making a fraction of what she'd earned before. But she was living modestly, paying down debt, attending therapy twice a week, that she'd completely changed her life. As for me, I threw myself into healing. I joined a support group for seniors who'd experienced financial abuse by family members. Hearing other people's stories helped me process my own. Many of them had faced worse, children who'd actually succeeded in stealing everything, spouses who'd drained life savings, relatives who'd left them destitute. My story had a better ending than most. I started speaking publicly about elder financial abuse, giving presentations at senior centers and community groups. I talked about the warning signs, the manipulation tactics, the importance of having an advocate. I told my story, not with shame, but with strength, hoping it would help someone else recognize the danger before it was too late. My garden came back to life under my care. The roses Marcus planted bloomed spectacularly that summer, better than they had in years. I started hosting garden parties again, filling my house with friends, laughter, and life. The house that Isabella had tried to take became more fully mine than ever before. I updated my will, leaving the house to a nonprofit that provided legal services to elderly people facing exploitation. Isabella would inherit some personal items and a modest amount of money, but the bulk of my estate would go to helping others in situations like mine. Then one October afternoon, 8 months after the court hearing, my doorbell rang. I looked through the window and saw Isabella standing on my porch, alone, holding a small bouquet of roses, the same kind Marcus had planted. My hand hesitated on the doorknob. I could pretend I wasn't home. I could send her away. I had every right to protect myself. But something in the way she stood there, uncertain and small, reminded me of the daughter I'd raised, and I opened the door. We stood looking at each other for a long moment. She'd changed. She looked older, tired, but there was something different in her eyes. The hardness was gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine remorse. "Mom, I know I don't have the right to be here. If you want me to leave, I will. But I needed to see you, to say I'm sorry in person, to try to explain." "Come in," I said quietly. We sat in my living room, the same room where she'd announced her plan to steal my house, and she told me everything. The full truth about the debts, the pressure from Damien, the way they'd convinced themselves they were entitled to my assets. She didn't make excuses. She owned it all. "I've been in therapy for 7 months now," she said, "working through why I did what I did. My therapist thinks I was so focused on maintaining a certain image, a certain lifestyle, that I lost sight of what actually mattered. I measured my worth by my bank account and my address, instead of by the kind of person I was. And when the money problems started, I was willing to do anything to protect that image, even hurt you." She pulled out her phone and showed me bank statements. "I'm on a payment plan for the debts. It'll take me years, but I'm managing. I sold the Mercedes and bought a used Honda. I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood I would have been embarrassed to admit I lived in before. I'm learning to live within my means, to be content with enough instead of always wanting more." Asking him what about Damien, I asked. "The divorce was finalized last month. He blamed me for everything, claimed I was the one who wanted to take your house, that he was just going along with it. She gave a bitter smile. Maybe that was partially true. I don't know anymore. All I know is that being married to him made me into someone I hated, and I had to get out. We talked for 3 hours that afternoon, really talked, in a way we hadn't in years. She asked about my life, my garden, my volunteer work, and actually listened to the answers. She told me about therapy, about the hard work of facing her own flaws, about learning to live differently. When she left, she hugged me at the door. "I don't expect us to go back to the way things were," she said. "I know I destroyed that. But if you're ever willing to try to build something new, something honest, I'd like that. No pressure, no timeline. Just if you're willing." I watched her drive away in her modest Honda, and I felt something I hadn't felt in over a year. A tiny seed of hope. Over the next year, Isabella and I rebuilt our relationship slowly, carefully, with clearly defined boundaries. We met for coffee once a month, always in public places, always with no discussion of finances or my property. We talked about books, about her therapy progress, about my volunteer work. We were learning to know each other as people rather than as mother and daughter with all the complicated expectations that relationship carried. She came to my garden party that next spring, mingling awkwardly with my friends who all knew what she'd done. Some were cold to her. Others were cautiously polite. Monica watched her like a hawk the entire time. But Isabella handled it with grace, accepting their judgment, not trying to defend herself or win them over. As I watched her that day, sitting on my porch steps, talking quietly with one of my book club friends, I realized something. I had survived. Not just survived, I had fought back and won. I had protected myself, maintained my independence, and still found a way to leave the door open for possible reconciliation. That took strength I hadn't known I possessed. The relationship I had with Isabella now was different from what we'd had before. More careful, more honest, with less assumption of unconditional trust. Maybe that was better. Maybe trust that had to be rebuilt was stronger than trust that had never been tested. I also realized I was proud of myself, proud that I'd recognized the danger, proud that I'd fought back, proud that I'd refused to be a victim. I'd spent so many years being accommodating, avoiding conflict, trying to keep peace. But when it mattered most, when my independence and my home were on the line, I'd found my backbone. My work speaking about elder financial abuse expanded. I was invited to present at conferences, to speak to professional organizations, to train bank employees and healthcare workers on recognizing exploitation. My story, painful as it was helping others. That gave it meaning beyond the personal trauma. I met other survivors, other elderly people who'd been targeted by family members and had fought back successfully. We formed a support network, sharing resources, attending each other's court hearings, celebrating victories together. These people became like family to me. Family I'd chosen, family that respected me. One woman in our group, a 72-year-old named Patricia Lynn, became a close friend. Her son had actually succeeded in getting guardianship through a corrupt attorney and had drained her savings before she was able to fight back. She'd eventually won her freedom, but lost almost everything financially. I helped her find pro bono legal help to go after the attorney and her son for restitution. Watching her fight inspired me. That's what I learned through all of this. We're stronger than people think. We're stronger than our children think when they look at us and see frail, confused elderly people ripe for exploitation. We have decades of experience, of surviving hardships, of navigating complex situations. We're not helpless unless we let ourselves be. 2 years after the court hearing, I was featured in a local news story about elder financial abuse. The reporter interviewed me in my garden, with Marcus's roses blooming behind me. I told my story publicly, using my real name, hoping it would help others recognize the warning signs. After the story aired, I received dozens of emails and letters from people facing similar situations. Adult children pressuring them to sign over property, spouses controlling finances, relatives isolating them and spreading rumors of incompetence. Each story broke my heart, but I responded to every single one, offering resources, encouragement, and the name of my attorney, Elizabeth, who'd built a practice specializing in these cases. One letter stood out. It was from a 70-year-old woman whose daughter and son-in-law were using almost the exact same playbook Isabella and Damien had used. The fake concern, the talk of assisted living, the pressure to sell her house. She felt alone and scared. She didn't know if she had the strength to fight. I called her immediately. We talked for 2 hours. I connected her with Elizabeth. I introduced her to our support group. I walked her through every step of protecting herself, documenting everything, building her case. 6 months later, she called to tell me she'd won her court hearing. Her daughter's guardianship petition had been denied. She was keeping her house and her independence. That's when I really understood the power of sharing our stories. My pain, my battle, could light the way for someone else. The house Isabella had tried to steal wasn't just my home anymore. It was a symbol of resistance, of an elderly woman who'd refused to be victimized. And that story had value beyond my personal experience. Isabella and I continued our careful relationship. 3 years after everything happened, she asked if she could bring someone to meet me. His name was Andrew, a high school teacher she'd been dating for 6 months. He was nothing like Damien. Modest, kind, genuinely interested in my stories about teaching. They'd met at a community center where Isabella had started volunteering, teaching free legal clinics for low-income families. "She's really changed," Andrew told me privately when Isabella stepped away to take a phone call. "She talks about what happened with you often, about how it was her rock bottom, about how she had to completely rebuild herself. I just wanted you to know that the person she was then isn't who she is now." I appreciated his words, but I also knew change was a process, not a destination. Isabella would have to keep choosing to be different every single day for the rest of her life. Just like I had to keep choosing to protect myself while leaving room for possible healing. One thing I never did was forget. I kept all the documentation from that time in a safe in my closet. The threatening emails, the moving company work order, the fake affidavits, the court transcripts. Not because I wanted to dwell on it, but because I never wanted to forget what I was capable of when pushed. I'd stood up to my own daughter. I'd fought the legal system. I'd won. That documentation was proof of my strength. I also kept Isabella's apology letter, the handwritten one she'd sent before the settlement. Some days when I doubted whether reconciliation was possible, I'd read it and remember that people could change, could face their worst selves and choose to become better. My house stayed mine. I lived in it for another decade after the court battle, filling it with memories and friends and purpose. When I finally did make the decision to move into a smaller place, it was my choice, on my timeline with no pressure from anyone. I sold the house myself and donated a significant portion of the proceeds to the elder financial abuse organization I'd helped found. Show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel, and tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. Let me tell you what happened in those final years of my life, because the ending of the story matters just as much as the beginning. By the time I was 75, I'd become something I never expected: an advocate, a voice for the voiceless, a warrior for elderly people facing exploitation. The organization I'd helped found, Seniors Against Financial Abuse, had grown into a statewide resource with legal aid, support groups, and educational programs. We'd helped hundreds of people protect themselves from predatory family members. I served on the board of directors, using my story in fundraising presentations and awareness campaigns. Every time I spoke, I watched people's faces and saw recognition. They knew someone this had happened to, or they feared it happening to themselves. The problem was so much bigger than I'd realized. Isabella, to her credit, also became involved. She volunteered with the organization's legal clinic, offering free consultations to seniors dealing with exploitation. She used her legal expertise to help others while continuing her own therapy and personal growth. Watching her help people in situations similar to what she'd put me through was strange, but also healing in a way. She was trying to make amends not just to me, but to the world. She married Andrew 4 years after they started dating. It was a small ceremony in my garden, surrounded by close friends and family. I walked her down the aisle, something I never thought I'd do after everything that happened. But there we were, mother and daughter, with years of hard work between the trauma and this moment of joy. During her vows, Isabella said something that made me cry. She looked at Andrew and said, "You've taught me what it means to love someone for who they are, not for what they can give me. And my mother taught me what it means to stand up for yourself, even when it costs you everything. I'm grateful to both of you for showing me how to be a better person." After the ceremony, she came to me privately. "Thank you, Mom, for not giving up on me completely, for letting me prove I could change. I know most people wouldn't have." I hugged her, this daughter who'd tried to destroy me and then rebuilt herself. "You're welcome, but Isabella, you did the hard work. I just left the door open." Monica, who'd been my rock through everything, stood with me watching the reception in my garden. "You know what I admire most about you?" she said. "You found a way to be both strong and merciful. You protected yourself without becoming bitter. That's rare." I thought about that a lot in the years that followed. I could have let what happened turn me into someone angry and suspicious, someone who trusted no one and saw threats everywhere. Instead, I'd chosen to use my experience as fuel for helping others, while maintaining my capacity for hope and connection. That felt like its own kind of victory. My health started declining when I was 78. Nothing dramatic, just the slow accumulation of age-related issues: arthritis, high blood pressure, fatigue. I made the decision to move from my house into a senior apartment complex, a real one this time, one I chose myself with no pressure from anyone. Isabella and Andrew helped me move, packing boxes alongside Monica and my friends from book club. It was emotional leaving the house Marcus and I had shared, but it was my choice, my timeline, my decision. That made all the difference. The senior apartment complex, Riverside Gardens, was actually wonderful. Independent living with optional services, a community of active seniors, programs, and activities. I made new friends, joined their book club, started teaching gardening classes in their community plots. I stayed busy and engaged and happy. Isabella visited regularly, usually weekly, bringing groceries or just staying for tea and conversation. Our relationship had found its equilibrium. We were close, but with clear boundaries. I'd made it clear in my estate planning that she would inherit some sentimental items and a modest amount of money, but the bulk of my estate was going to charity. She'd accepted this without question or complaint. One afternoon when I was 80, Isabella brought her daughter to meet me. My granddaughter, little Sophia Chen Torres, 3 years old with dark curls and Isabella's eyes. I held her in my lap and felt a complex mix of emotions. Joy at meeting her, grief for the years of family connection I'd missed because of the estrangement, gratitude that Isabella had built a healthy life that included this beautiful child. "Sophia won't know the story of what happened between us for a long time," Isabella said as we watched her play. "But when she's old enough, I'm going to tell her. I'm going to tell her how I almost destroyed my relationship with you out of greed and desperation, and how you stood up for yourself, and how we both did the hard work to build something new. I want her to understand that people can make terrible mistakes and still choose to do better." "I think that's wise," I said. "Our stories are teaching tools, even the painful ones. especially the painful ones, Isabella corrected. As I moved into my 80s, my work with seniors against financial abuse shifted. I couldn't do as much travel or public speaking, but I mentored other survivors, offering phone counseling and support. I wrote articles for their newsletter. I recorded video testimonials for their website. My story continued to reach people and make a difference. One day, I received a letter from a woman in Seattle whose daughter had tried almost exactly what Isabella had attempted. The woman had read my story online, recognized the pattern, and immediately consulted an attorney. She'd stopped the exploitation before it could progress. "Your story saved my home," she wrote. "It saved my independence. It maybe even saved my life, because I don't know what I would have done if I'd lost everything." I cried, reading that letter. All the pain, all the trauma, all the hard work. It had meaning. It had helped someone I'd never meet avoid the devastation I'd experienced. That felt like redemption, both for my suffering and for Isabella's actions that had started this whole journey. Strong, pause. Monica passed away when I was 83. She'd been my best friend for nearly 50 years, my advocate, my supporter through the darkest time of my life. At her funeral, I stood to speak and said, "Monica believed that elderly people deserved respect, dignity, and protection. She used her legal expertise to help countless seniors fight back against exploitation. But more than that, she was a friend who showed up when it mattered most. My life is better because she was in it." After Monica died, Isabella stepped in to help me with things I was struggling with: technology, medical appointments, legal paperwork, but she did it differently than before. She asked first. She respected my decisions. She offered help without taking control. The dynamic between us had fundamentally changed. Andrew told me once, "She talks about you constantly with her clients. When she's helping elderly people deal with exploitative family members, she tells them about how you fought back, and she tells them about her own role in trying to exploit you. She doesn't hide it. She uses it as a teaching tool about what financial abuse looks like from the abuser's perspective." "That must be hard for her," I said. "It is, but she believes it's important. She thinks if she can help people understand how someone can convince themselves they're helping when they're actually harming, it might prevent some of these situations." I was proud of her for that. It would have been easy to bury what she'd done, to pretend it never happened, to present herself as simply an attorney helping seniors. Instead, she owned her past and used it to help others. When I was 85, I had a significant health scare, a mild stroke that left me with some weakness on my left side. I spent 2 weeks in rehabilitation, learning to walk steadily again, regaining strength. Isabella was there every day, bringing books, keeping me company, advocating with the medical staff when needed. One evening, as she sat beside my hospital bed, I said, "You know, if this had happened back when you were trying to get guardianship, you would have seen it as proof I was incompetent." She was quiet for a long moment. "You're right. I would have used this against you. I would have used your vulnerability as ammunition to take your independence." She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I'm so ashamed of who I was then." "Don't be ashamed anymore," I said gently. "Be determined to stay different. There's a difference." I recovered from the stroke and returned to my apartment at Riverside Gardens. I needed a little more help than before, assistance with heavy housework, occasional transportation, but I was still independent, still making my own decisions, still living life on my terms. The organization, Seniors Against Financial Abuse, threw a celebration for my 86th birthday. It had grown so much in the 10 years since I'd helped found it. They'd helped over 2,000 seniors protect themselves from exploitation. They'd successfully lobbied for stronger laws protecting elderly people. They'd trained thousands of professionals to recognize the warning signs. "This organization exists because Veronica Chen refused to be a victim," the executive director said in her speech. "She fought back, she won, and then she used her experience to protect others. She turned her pain into purpose. I sat at the head table, surrounded by people whose lives had been changed by the organization, survivors of exploitation, their attorneys, advocates, volunteers. Isabella was there with Andrew and Sophia, now 7 years old and full of questions about what Grandma Veronica had done to help people. I helped people keep their homes and their freedom, I told her, because those things are important and worth fighting for. In my final years, I lived with the satisfaction of knowing I'd made a difference. My story had traveled far beyond Portland, far beyond Oregon, reaching people across the country who needed to hear that it was possible to fight back, to win, to rebuild. Isabella and I had built something real from the wreckage of what she'd tried to do. Not the relationship we'd had before. That was gone forever. But something new, something honest, something based on mutual respect rather than assumed obligation. When I drafted my final will at 87, I left Isabella some meaningful items: my wedding ring, photo albums, some of Marcus's belongings. I also left her a letter to be read after my death, telling her I was proud of who she'd become, acknowledging the hard work she'd done to change, and thanking her for being brave enough to face what she'd done and choose differently. The bulk of my estate went to Seniors Against Financial Abuse, enough to fully fund their operations for years and expand their services. My story had helped create this organization, and my final gift would help it continue helping others long after I was gone. I lived to be 89 years old, dying peacefully in my sleep at Riverside Gardens with Isabella holding my hand. My last words to her were simple: "You did good. You became someone good. I'm proud of you." At my funeral, Isabella spoke through tears. "My mother taught me the most important lesson of my life, but not in the way mothers usually teach their children. She taught me by refusing to let me victimize her, by standing up for herself when I tried to take everything from her, by fighting back when I expected her to surrender." She paused, composing herself. "I tried to steal my mother's home, her independence, her dignity. And instead of destroying our relationship completely, which would have been justified, she gave me the chance to prove I could change, not immediately, not easily, but over years of consistent effort. She taught me that consequences matter, that amends are possible, and that strength doesn't have to mean hardness." She looked at my casket. "Mom, I'm sorry it took almost losing you for me to understand what I had. Thank you for being strong enough to save yourself, and gracious enough to let me back into your life. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure your story helps others protect themselves." The organization I'd helped build continued growing after my death. They named their legal assistance fund after me, the Veronica Chen Legal Defense Fund, helping seniors afford attorneys when fighting exploitation by family members. Isabella contributed significantly to that fund every year, her way of continuing to make amends. My story was included in their training materials, used in presentations to banks, healthcare facilities, senior centers. It became a case study in resilience, in recognizing manipulation, in fighting back effectively. And every time someone heard my story and used it to protect themselves or a loved one, my struggle meant something. That's what I learned through all of this. Our hardest battles can become our greatest gifts to others, if we're willing to share them. The trauma Isabella inflicted on me by trying to steal my home could have destroyed me. Instead, I let it transform me into someone who could help others facing the same threat. And Isabella, she learned that some mistakes are so severe they can never be completely erased, but they can be addressed through consistent, genuine change over time. She learned that making amends isn't about words, it's about actions, repeated over years, proving you've become someone different. Our story isn't a fairy tale with a simple, happy ending. It's a complicated, messy, painful story about betrayal and survival, about fighting back and finding your strength, about the long, hard work of rebuilding trust after it's been shattered. But it's also a story about hope. Hope that people can change. Hope that the right support makes a difference. Hope that sharing our stories can light the way for others. So here's what I want you to take from my story. If you're being pressured by family members to surrender your independence, your assets, your home, fight back. Document everything. Get legal help. Don't let shame or guilt or love keep you from protecting yourself. Family members who truly love you will respect your boundaries. Those who don't aren't acting out of love, no matter what they claim. And if you've been the person doing the exploiting, if you recognize yourself in Isabella's part of this story, know that change is possible, but it requires genuine accountability. Not excuses, not justification, not minimizing what you've done. Real accountability means facing the harm you've caused, making amends through actions, and doing the hard work of becoming someone different. We all have the capacity for both harm and healing. Which one we choose defines who we become. I chose to heal and help others. Isabella chose to face what she'd done and change. Those choices made all the difference. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. This is Veronica Chen's story, told so that others might recognize the warning signs, might find the courage to fight back, might know they're not alone. And if my words have reached even one person who needed to hear them, then everything I went through had purpose. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And remember, you're never too old to stand up for yourself, to fight for your independence, to refuse to be a victim. Your life, your home, your freedom, these things are worth fighting for, always. And to every daughter and son out there, love your parents. Respect them. Honor them. But don't you ever, ever try to take what's theirs just because you need it. That's not love. That's exploitation. And parents deserve better. Stand strong. Fight back. Help others. That's how we change things. One story at a time. One person at a time. One act of courage at a time.